This lecture is all about Sachplakat, the First World War, and Dada, and this is part 1. Art Nouveau design styles slowly lost their popularity between 1905 and 1914. There are three main reasons for this, and the first one that there was this change in fashion. This new look, or Art Nouveau, became dated, and designers and the public wanted less, not more. So they felt that the Art Nouveau design styles were too fancy, had too much ornamentation. There was also a growing customer base for designers. They were not exclusively in the entertainment industry anymore. And then the onset of the First World War between the major European powers really focused designers' work on nationalist causes. And really, the First World War would have a lasting impact on graphic design and its patrons. So, Sachplakat in Germany, and this first blow against Art Nouveau came not from a movement, but from an amateur designer. Lucien Bernard was born in Stuttgart to a family who really did not support his artistic ambitions. He briefly attended school, and he was exposed to Art Nouveau posters from Alphonse Mucha to the Beggerstaff brothers. He entered a poster competition for the Priester Matched Company. And really, at this time, this type of contest was common because there was no standard profession of graphic design or an established community of professionals that clients could turn to. So clients would have these poster competitions. The first drafts that he created were pretty complex, influenced by Jugendstil and Japanisme, and really looked a lot like posters designed by Art Nouveau designers. So what he did instead was begin this process of addition by subtraction. So he gradually removed any element that could distract from the matches themselves. And this is his final poster. So in this draft, he left only 2 red matches and the company name in block letters with a neutral colored background. His image was initially said to have been thrown in the trash by the judges, but it was retrieved by one of the advertising executives who exclaimed, "This is my first prize. This is genius." So this really began Bernard's new career, and a revolutionary change in the design of German posters had begun. So this is really the first example of a Sachplakat type design poster. This new poster was called Sachplakat, translated roughly as object poster. And there is a link here that I will share on Blackboard for you to be able to look at. And Sachplakat designs looked both to the past, which is sort of the still with the Japanese influence, and also to the future because of their radical simplification and blunt messaging. If you compare Leonardo Capiello and the Beggerstaffs with their use of Japanisme, both really used unrelated images or allegories, so like the Green Devil. However, in Bernhard's poster, it's really a simple communication, a message, the priester matches, and the product name, which really helped Bernhard's work stand apart. So here you can see the Beggerstaffs use the sort of man with the staff advertising the magazine. And you've got this Green Devil advertising, I guess, some sort of liquor or alcohol. And then you go back to the Priester matches, and it's just the name and the matches. The Sachplakat style and its radical simplification did not exist in a vacuum, but really represents a direct rejection of all the ornamental complexity of the Art Nouveau movement. The scholars called this relationship dialogical, meaning that the style came out of a dialogue. The Sachplakat style gave corporate clients an alternative to the artiness of Art Nouveau, which companies thought could overshadow their product. So really, in the future, companies wanted their product to stand out, not the ornamentation. So this is an advertisement that Bernhard made for Bosch spark plugs. He was really highly sought after following his success with Priester, and established himself and the Sachplakat style as the advertising norm for many German companies. In this Bosch poster, you can see this bold juxtaposition of orange and blue, which really creates a striking background for the neutral color of the product, which is just a simple spark plug. The owners of the advertising and lithography firm of Hollerbaum and Schmidt attached themselves to Bernhard and the Sachplakat phenomenon. They signed him and also several additional designers to exclusive contracts. Included in the group, often called the Six, was Julius Klinger from Vienna. After moving to Berlin, he came under the influence of the first of the Beggerstaffs, and then the Sachplakat style initiated by Lucian Bernhard. So this is a poster by Julius Klinger. It's for the Mooring Chandelier Company, and it's really one of the icons of the Sachplakat style. This poster displays its product alone without any setting or decorative narrative elements that drive so many advertising messages. So you see the name and the chandelier, and that's about it. This ad for Opel cars by Hans Rudi Ert does not display the product, but the consumer of that product. So this is for Opel automobiles. As with the beef eater image from the Beggerstaffs, the contour is broken in several places, and the man's collar flows into the flat field of color. So a really good example of figure ground. Ludwig Hohlwein was another successful representative of the Sachplakat style. He was an architect by training, and in 1911 established himself as a graphic designer using this style. In this poster, he shows his tendency to use Beggerstaff-like reductiveness. He still maintains a form of volume in the rendering parts of the image, so it's still a little more complex than, say, the artwork and designs of Lucian Bernhard. But this hybrid style mixes the simplicity of the Sachplakat with a projection of upper-class elegance and refinement. This is really not typical to the Sachplakat style, but he showed a flair for self-conscious design with vivid color and abstract patterning, which really distinguished him from the other Sachplakat designers. This is another one of his posters for Marco Polo tea, and he really shows the product in an exotic manner, more like Art Nouveau posters than Sachplakat. But again, he's sort of speaking to the more affluent, sort of high, more wealthy consumer. The most important journal dedicated to graphic design in Berlin was founded by a dentist and a poster collector, Hans Josef Sachs. He really promoted the creation of the Verein der again, I'm going to butcher these words, but Plackerfreund, or the Association of Friends of the Poster, and recruited Lucian Bernhard to act as an artistic consultant. He also designed its first logo. So in 1910, Sachs published a journal devoted to his passion of posters called Das Plakat. So this is a poster that Bernhard made for the journal, and it was really the most successful poster journal ever produced in Europe. During the earliest 20th century, there was an ongoing dispute for Germans about Roman type versus their national black letter Fraktur. At the start of the century, all newspapers and mainstream literature were printed in Fraktur, which, as you remember, is a little bit more difficult to read. The school system taught young people to write in Gothic script. But publishers who wanted to look more modern started to embrace the Roman traditional, and Germany decided on a path of dual Roman and black letter writing for its national writing styles. So this is a Sachplakat poster that shows the artist sided with the German industries that wanted a more modern look, so they did embrace the Roman lettering. They used this plain block letter type style in their hand-drawn posters. This is a poster created by Lucian Bernhard, and he created a typeface called Bernhard Antiqua, which was based on his lettering in the Priester poster. This was originally produced for the linotype machine, and after the First World War broke out in August of 1914, the pool of Sachplakat designers found a lot more new work as they shifted from the promotion of industry to the needs of the German war machine. Which brings us to the First World War. As you might have learned in high school or elementary school history, the First World War was started when Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. This war pitted the Allies, which included Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and the United States, against the Central Powers of Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Turkey. Scholars estimate that as many as 20 million people were killed and 33 million were wounded in the First World War, also known as the Great War. And because it was wartime, this war created a need to influence the views of potential recruits and financial backers. They needed to gain support of the population to really support this conflict that, if you remember in your history studies, was supposed to end by Christmas. And because this war wasn't always fought where people lived, citizens were often ignorant of the scope of the horror at the front. So what the government did is they communicated to its citizens by making posters and putting them all over the hoardings across the cities of Europe. If you think about it, at this time, journalists' access to war was pretty much non-existent. So the messages were controlled by the government that could both enlighten and mislead the viewers if it so desired. So this World War I led to an increase in the production of posters as different governments sought to rally their own citizens to support the war effort, both through recruitment of soldiers as well as money to finance the war. When the war began, Britain had the smallest army, so they had the greatest need to encourage volunteers. They relied heavily on posters to encourage young men to join the fighting. The British poster campaign was successful, as over 2.5 million British men joined the military between August 1914 and January 1916. And in this way, stylistically, if we go back to design, there was an abrupt halt to the decorative Art Nouveau, Japanese and other abstract styles, and a move toward more realistic representation. And there were really two main reasons for this. The government commissioning these posters were a lot more conservative because they wanted to appeal to a broad cross-section of the population. Also, the majority of posters were designed in-house by commercial lithography firms, so they weren't hiring outside designers. The First World War really acted as the catalyst to diminish the status of graphic design as an art form. So this poster, designed by Alfred Leete, was one of the most influential British posters for recruitment and used a direct appeal. This is really considered the first pointing poster. This poster depicted designed by Alfred Leete, depicted Lord Kitchener, who was a national icon and the Secretary of State for War, who oversaw the recruitment drive. He was so famous that it was unnecessary to record his name on the poster. And you can see the direct eye contact between him and his potential recruit. And again, this style was called the pointing poster. You know, America had one, if you guys recall, the Uncle Sam posters. This is another example of a different genre of British war poster that really stressed the comradeship and excitement of life as a soldier. They depicted war as a heroic adventure and really tried to present the war in more romantic terms. And this was again used to recruit young men to join the war effort. Britain also used emasculating messages. It was used in posters for those recruits who seemed to be immune to the direct appeal of Lord Kitchener or the sense of romantic adventure. And it was really a very psychological attack on men that any designer could try to use. So what emasculation is really the questioning or weakening of a man's energy, strength, and quote-unquote manliness. So this poster sought to persuade women to pressure their husbands into joining the war effort. This is by Edward Keeley, The Women of Britain Say Go. You can see here the little boy is clutching his sister's skirt, suggesting that men who stay home are akin to pre-adolescent children clutching their mommies. This is the most famous poster of emasculation ever made, and this is by Seville Lumley, called Daddy, What Did You Do in the Great War? It's said to be a masterpiece of bullying propaganda. And really, it's a very uninspiring design, but it does nothing to take away from the direct condemnation of men who didn't volunteer to fight in the war. So you can see this little girl is sitting on her daddy's lap saying, what did you do in the war? And it really remained the most potent imagery of the war years in many people's minds. Many years later, George Orwell, the author, mused, I've often laughed to think of that recruiting poster, what did you do in the Great War, Daddy? And all of the men who must have been lured into the army by just that poster and then still afterwards despised by their children. As the war drug on with no end in sight, the British authorities were compelled to address this civilian unhappiness. Because all of a sudden, this romanticization of the war, people were dying, sons were dying, husbands were dying. So a new wave of posters were produced to really try to rally the people at home and created the idea of the atrocity poster. Designers turned to images of violence and cruelty to unite the civilians behind the war against the Germans. This is a rare example of a poster that's message is driven more by its text than its illustration. So you can see this German nurse is pouring water on the ground, not giving it to this hurt British soldier. So these posters really used images of violence and cruelty that they tried to avoid in earlier posters. The theme of the sadistic nurse hit home in England, where Florence Nightingale, a national hero who died only a few years before the war, had revolutionized the nursing profession. At the time of the First World War, Britain held colonial legacy control over the political military affairs of Canada. Canadian recruitment posters featured many of the same manipulative messages. They also relied on realistic illustration rather than avant-garde abstraction. Because of Canada's large French-speaking communities, many posters were published in both French and English. So this poster shows another variation of the pointing style, with a desperate-looking soldier at the front making a direct appeal. This poster is urging Canadians to help fund the war by signing up for a victory loan. This is another example of the Canadian way of addressing narrow audiences in order to bolster recruitment. So this was aimed at Jewish Canadians, which was published both in English and Yiddish. The man whose bonds are being severed by a British soldier says, "You have cut my bonds and set me free. Now let me help you set others free." The U.S. entered the First World War on the side of the Allies in April of 1917. This 2-year period between 1915 and 1917, saw increasing tension between the U.S. and Germany as German submarines, the U-boats, attacked the merchant ships carrying goods to Western allies. The greatest American contribution came when U.S. troops assisted the Allies in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, which broke through Germany's Hindenburg Line. By the end of the war in 1918, the U.S. had deployed nearly 2 million fighting men in France. And really, one of the main reasons the U.S. came into the war is because on May 7th, a German submarine sunk a British luxury liner called the Lusitania, which killed 128 Americans. In Boston, the American illustrator Frederick Spear produced this image, which became a basis of a recruitment poster. The newspaper report from the event described a mother with a 3-month-old child clasped tightly in her arms. Her face was half smile, her baby's head rested against her breast. No one has tried to separate them. So it's a really disturbing and compelling poster showing what happened, when a woman and child died from the Lusitania being bombed by the Germany. This is perhaps the most compelling atrocity image ever published. In the weeks after the war was declared on the Central Powers, which is Germany and Austria-Hungary, Americans enthusiastically printed thousands of posters covering the walls of American cities. In New York City alone, volunteers pasted over 20,000 posters on every available surface. America actually produced more posters than any other nation. And many of the artists had attended or taught at the country's illustration schools, including Cooper Union, the New York School of Art, and the Art Institute of Chicago, which are still thriving schools today. In wartime graphic design, Americans relied on conservative illustration, just like were practiced in Britain, but more often than not used top talents with recognized past successes, not workers in the print shops. So James Montgomery Flagg based his most famous poster on the pointing style developed by Alfred Leete in his poster of Lord Kirchner. He transformed Kirchner into Uncle Sam, which was a personification of the United States. He contributed over 40 posters to support the American war effort. And you guys probably all recognize this poster, the I Want You for the U.S. Army, and this was designed by James Flagg. Between the summer of 1917 and the end of the war, Flagg's poster of Uncle Sam would be printed more than 4 million times. So this is another poster that he designed, and this shows the strength of Flagg's ability to match a simple slogan with a compelling illustration. So this shows an outraged man ready to sign up after learning of German atrocities. And you can see the headline in the paper says, "Huns kill women and children." Howard Chandler Christie was another successful poster designer, and he used a theme of war as adventure. He was the most famous illustrator who sought to glamorize the military conflict, and he created this, his basic device was the Christie Girl, an American version of the sexualized young woman that populated many European posters in the Art Nouveau era. So this is the Gee, I Wish I Were a Man poster designed by Howard Christie. The United States had a more censorious public than Europe and really cut the use of sexuality in advertising. And this, you saw this in the former previous lecture with the Waverly bike advertisements. But Howard Christie was really good at balancing fresh-faced wholesomeness with the right amount of giggling sexual availability. In this poster, young women both attracted and emasculated young men of recruiting age. It implies that the sexual availability of young women is part of the naval service, at the same time suggesting that a girlish young woman is willing to join the Navy while men stand aside, which is sort of similar to the British emasculation. This is another variation of Uncle Sam's direct appeal using a Christie Girl. Christie's posters, like many produced in America, have a bit more flair than those produced by their British counterparts. You can see the hand-drawn text, and this is because American posters were produced by skilled illustrators, and they really were better at integrating text and image. The French posters during the First World War also leaned toward a higher level of aesthetic accomplishment than those produced in Britain. The French were more appreciative of poster art, and posters were designed by top painters with established credentials. The French government did not rely on painters or graphic designers, but really masters of academic style. And you can see that in this poster by Lucien Jonas. He had been appointed to the post of the military painter, and he produced thousands of drawings and sketches based on his experience at the front. And this advertises France's Sixth War loan. You can see the winged Marianne, who is the personification of France, is flying above the heads of the charging group of soldiers and protecting them. They appeared rugged and dirty amid a stressful battle, which is really rarely shown on posters. The majority of wartime publications ignored any imagery that was suggestive of the horrors of a conflict in which, on some really bad war days, 50,000 men would die in the face of machine guns and artillery barrages. Marianne is holding a cornucopia, or a horn of plenty, illustrating how she is pouring out the bounty onto the French troops. A really important part of wartime propaganda in the conflict was the message that the war would end with a promise of liberty, freedom, or some other ideal goal. So the rooster in this image by Abel Favre is symbolized the fighting spirit of France. The poster asks citizens pour forth their gold in order to assist the war effort. So the German government did not demand that its poster designers turn away from modern abstract design. So a lot of the German war posters at the time used the Sachplakat style because it really became a staple of German propaganda. Sachplakat artists such as Lucien Bernard remained prominent in the creation of war posters. So this is one of his posters. The translation is that is the way to peace. The armored fist in this poster stands in for the product, Germans' military might. The poster's lettering shows Bernhard embracing the black letter tradition. Not all posters were used black letter, but the Gothic script saw a resurgence because of the militant feelings on the part of the designers at the public at large, which was German nationality. And this is posters by Hans Rudi Ert, U-Boot Heraus. So this poster promoted a German film celebrating submarine warfare, with their submarines were called U-boats. And this also illustrates the simplification of the Sachplakat style, which really also distanced the viewer from the grim details of the war. You can see the Japanese style here with the flat planes of color, and the lettering features bold block letters, which are also typical of the Sachplakat style. This is a poster designed by Julius Klinger. The key element that separates this poster aesthetically from most of the Allied images is the sophisticated way in which Klinger uses the 8 as both a textual and a graphical element. This stylish abstraction is a far cry from the literal rendering typical of most Allied war posters. Which brings up the subject of realism versus abstraction. This is a poster by Ludwig Hohlwein, and it features a wounded soldier on crutches examining tools that could help him rejoin the civilian workforce. The Sachplakat style is still in place, though the simplified forms have been rendered with a painterly flair. You can definitely see the beggarstaff influence in this poster. But there's also sort of an emotional impact here as well, seeing the wounded soldier. An interesting parallel circumstance happened in Britain and Germany after the war. In both countries, there was a condemnation of the posters that had been produced. In Britain, they were really criticized for their emotional manipulation, but in Germany, it was the avant-garde stylishness of the posters that they felt failed to communicate an effective message to a large part of the population. Germany really did sort of blame those avant-garde posters for the reason that they lost the war.